Hello everyone, I'm here today to present my paper titled Graph Neural Network for Harvard Trojan Detection at Register Transfer Level, or in short GNN4TJ. I'm Rojin Yasai and I'm a PhD student studying computer engineering at University of California, Irvine. Here you can see the IC supply chain, which starts from the specification and goes through different design stages and synthesis, which eventually generates the physical layout. And this layout is passed to the foundry to be fabricated. And after some testing, packaging, and assembly stages, the final chip is ready. Because of outsourcing many of these processes and also using the third-party EDA tools and IPs, the whole IC supply chain is vulnerable to the threat of the Harvard Trojan insertion. Harvard Trojan is an intentional modification of the circuit, which is done by some rogue entities in order to do some malicious activities in the chip, such as leaking sensitive information, causing changing the functionality of the chip, degrading its performance, or denial of the service. Because of this, devastating effects of the Harvard Trojan is crucial and is a really major challenge in the security domain to detect the Harvard Trojans in the circuit. In this paper, we focus on Harvard Trojan detection in the pre-silicon stage. Currently in the literature, there are many work proposed to detect the Harvard Trojan in the pre-silicon stage. These methods can be categorized in 5 classes: test pattern generation, formal verification, code analysis, machine learning, and graph matching algorithms. These methods all suffer from several shortcomings and research challenges. First of all, many of them rely on a trusted golden reference, which is not available in practice. Secondly, the detection or scope of the many of these work is limited to a specific type of Trojans, or only the Trojans that are already known by the model and exist in its library. Also, another problem is expandability, because as the new defenses are developed, attackers are proposing new kind of Trojans, and the model should be able to expand itself and consider the new kind of Trojan as well. And lastly is the scalability issue. Because many of these models require manual work, they have too much complexity, or they are slow, or require a lot of memory and have a memory shortage problem, they cannot be really used for the large design, and they are not scalable. In order to address these problems and overcome these research challenges, we propose a novel approach to model the circuits using graph neural network and detect the Trojans. In this regard, we look into the RTL code, and we first generate a data flow graph representation for the hardware, and then we use a learning model to learn the behavior of the circuit. This model is later used to detect the Trojans in the circuit as well. So why use graph? So the thing is, Harvard design, as you know, is structural data and is non-Euclidean, while the majority of the algorithms and machine learning techniques are applied for the Euclidean data and cannot be directly used for the Harvard designs. Instead, we have the graph, which is a representation for the structured data, and it preserves the relation and the topological information, and intrinsically is a best match for representing the hardware. So we use a graph as a representation. Already there are some graph matching algorithms that try to find a similarity between different graphs, but those are NP complex, and because of complexity issue cannot be applied for the large designs. So we introduced the graph embedding and graph learning methods that don't have these problems and provides lots of features for our models. Our model starts with the pipeline for generating the graph for the hardware. We look into the several Verilog codes for the designs, and after pre-processing and flattening the design, we get one single file, which is passed through a parser to generate the abstract index tree. and then data flow analyzers create the signals data flow graphs, and later a merge and trim step merge and combine all of these signals data flow graph to have one connected graph representation for the whole design. This graph is a rooted graph that in the root we have the outputs, and in the leaf nodes we have the inputs and the constant values, and this whole graph tries to show the dependency from output to input and the computational structure of the data. And in this graph, the edges represent the dependency between the signals and signal and computations. And the node can represent the signals in the hardware, constant values, branches, or operations. In this page, you can see an example of RTL code and its corresponding data flow graph that is generated by our pipeline. And in the next stage, we pass this graph that is generated to our graph neural network model, which do the learning process. Graph neural network is a deep learning that operates on the graphs. It starts with several convolutional layers that try to define the convolution operations on the graphs based on the nodes' spatial relations. After these convolutions, we have a graph that have the key features of the designs inside it, and which is passed to a graph pool layer. This attention-based mechanism pool layer make the model be able to focus on a specific part of the graph that has the most influence in the result of our learning model. And this pooled layer create the pooled data flow graph, which is passed to the graph without the module, and which creates a vectorized embedding for the graph. Now we have a vectorized representation for the hardware, and then this vector can be applied to a multi-layer perceptron with a softmax, and this classifier classifies the design as hardware trojan free or hardware trojan infested. We evaluate our model using a dataset that we have gathered by expanding the Trojan benchmarks derived from the Trust Hub. For evaluation metric, we look into recall, precision, and F1 score. Recall expresses the model ability to detect the hardware Trojans, but it's not sufficient, especially when you have an unbalanced dataset. So to consider the false positive rate as well, we look into another metric, precisions, which it shows that what percentage of the samples that we labeled as a hardware Trojan were actually Trojan infested. And F1 score is the average of the precision and recall, which is an intuitive metric that shows the performance. In this figure, you see the high performance of our model, which can detect the hardware Trojan with true positive rate or the recall rate of around 97% on average. In the next table, you can see our timing result, which shows that we're able to detect the hardware Trojan in 21 milliseconds, which is much faster than current existing methods in the literature. The only time-consuming process in this work is the training part, which only happens once before using the model in the application stage. One of the key features of our model is the ability to detect the hardware Trojans that are unknown, and it doesn't put any assumption on the type of the payload or trigger of the designs. To investigate this property, we look into in this table. So in the first column, we have our model that is able to detect all different 6 Trojans that we have put in this table, and we compare it with other state-of-art models that you can see that they cannot detect it all because, for example, the first 2 models that are graph matching methods, they only detect the hardware Trojans that are already seen in their libraries. So in their papers, they haven't looked into the last 3 type of Trojans, so they only can detect the first 3 ones. The last 2 designs are based on formal verification methods. This technique tries to define a property for the Trojan, and they detect the Trojans that satisfy that property. So, for example, the third design just detect the Trojans that leak the informations. Their more advanced version The fourth one is able to detect the Trojans that cause denial of service as well, but still they fall short that detect the Trojans that degrade the performance. And you can see that how the scope of detection is limited, and that's why we have proposed our method that doesn't have this problem. In order to summarize our key features of our model, first of all, we represent the hardware design as a graph, and for the first time in the literature, we use graph neural network to learn the behavior of the circuit. Also, be able to detect the unknown Trojans, and we don't put any assumption on the type of the Trojans. This model is a completely a golden reference free and doesn't rely on a trusted reference to detect the Trojans. And lastly, our model is fast and fully automated. It doesn't require any manual work, any feature engineering, or property definitions. You can find our references here, and thank you for listening.